This is Past Force.
History is complicated. It's not just about who did what to who, what happened when. It's about asking questions. It's about interpreting the past. Why did this happen? What was the reason behind this? Why did this event come about in the way it did? It's much more philosophical than straightforward. And yeah, it does lead to arguments and different interpretations, different views, different opinions, but that's all part of it. Imagine, if you will, a room full of detectives. You've got Poirot and Miss Marple, you've got Inspector Morse, you've got Sherlock Holmes, you've got... Why am I thinking of Inspector Wexford? Yeah, let's go with Inspector Wexford. All of them arguing over the same crime. Poirot and Miss Marple, they're saying that Lady Wanking-Sock did it. Morse says, no, I don't think so. I think it was this delivery driver. Wexford, he's sort of on the fence. He's thinking about it and he thinks, no, I don't think it was either of those two. I think it was someone we didn't know yet. Meanwhile, Sherlock Holmes is reckoning that Lady Wanking-Sock's husband died when he accidentally slit his throat open on the record player. That's history. It's all those sort of different arguments, different interpretations of one event coming to different conclusions based on the same evidence. History is an argument, and history is opinion. Yet, there are some people who don't seem to be able to grasp that concept. They don't seem to be able to grasp that the past can be viewed in different ways. Which brings me onto a recent video I did about Douglas Haig, General of the First World War, and arguably the man responsible for sending thousands and thousands of men to their deaths on the Western Front. We had a comment. Now normally, I wouldn't respond to such a comment, but the comment demonstrates my point about what history is precisely. Do not be misled by this extraordinarily ahistorical polemic, which is apparently based on no research whatsoever. Other than a stream of profanity, the main argument here seems to be that Sir Douglas Haig expressed support for the well-bred horse in an article written in the 1920s. First off, this is an easily digestible, bite-sized, perhaps flippant, 2-minute video, not a full academic lecture. There is no time in a 2-minute video for extraneous detail. The only time is for a quick view of the source and a quick interpretation of it. It's like a tiny gobbet, if you will. Secondly, this is opinion, not fact, and just because my opinion doesn't match yours doesn't make my argument invalid or ahistorical or a polemic. The point of history is to argue, to express an opinion, to interpret a source, and that is exactly what I did here. I found a source, I interpreted it, and I came to a conclusion, an opinion, based on how I interpreted that source. That is history. And thirdly, I think you'll find that I wrote this video whilst planning a lesson I was teaching. That is why I came up with the idea of this video, because I was researching the First World War at the time, I was planning a lesson, and it is based on my lesson plan from that lesson. Also, I also include a list of further reading under every single Past Force video, including older ones which I have backtracked and found some more information. So don't tell me I didn't do any research for this, because I did. As for the stream of profanity, fuck off, this isn't Radio 4, I will fucking swear if I want to. And besides which, I'd hardly call 2 shit shows and 2 fucking morons a stream of profanity. And who calls it profanity anyway? Call it what it is. Swearing. Profanity. Fuck off. As for my main argument, it wasn't that Haig expressed support for the well-bred horse, though he did. It was that he didn't understand why the tactics on the Western Front failed. That even years after the war, he still didn't understand. He still didn't get it. He still thought that sending horses against barbed wire and machine gun fire was a good thing, and that they would still be useful in the future, that there was still a place for the horse in war as opposed to the tank and the aeroplane. As hindsight shows, horses were becoming obsolete in warfare, and Haig didn't grasp that information. He didn't see it. He didn't understand why the Western Front was as disastrous as it was. In point of fact, the quote is taken from a speech that Haig made in 1925 and subsequently reported in the Times. This quote, open bracket, taken completely out of context, only makes sense when one understands that it was made in a speech to the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons on the topic of horse breeding. I've used the source in exactly the same context as every other use of that source that I have found. Everybody else that I've found uses it in exactly the same way, to say that Haig didn't understand why the tactics of the First World War went so badly, that he didn't understand why sending horses into mud was foolish. And how does it only make sense when one understands that Haig was delivering a speech to the veterinary surgeons? Haig was bullshitting? Got no proof of that. Doesn't affect the interpretation in this case. He's not just telling them what they want to hear. He's saying, I believe there will still be a use for the horse in the future, and tanks and aeroplanes, nah, they're nothing compared to the horse. Doesn't change the interpretation. Okay, let's look at what the Times said. Let's look at this in a bit more, this speech in a little more detail. Some enthusiasts today talked about the probability of horses becoming extinct, and prophesied that the airplane, the tank, and the motor car would supersede the horse, in future wars. But history had always shown that great inventions somehow or other cured themselves. They always produced antidotes. Does that change anything? No. If anything, I think it only reinforces my arguments. Haig is still saying that the horse will, like Celine Dion's heart, go on and on, in spite of what had happened 10 years earlier, with horses and cavalry being obliterated and decimated on the Western Front. Haig should have known that. Haig was there. Haig should have seen that, oh, horses against this modern technology, it's not working. Horse cavalry warfare, it's been superseded. We've now got tanks and aeroplanes, and they can do 100 times what the horse can. He should have been able to see that. But clearly, even years after the war, he didn't. And this is despite other people knowing that days of cavalry warfare were over. Other people had seen what had happened on the Western Front, and they realised, yeah, no room for cavalry. But Haig, Douglas Haig, is saying, nah, they're wrong. Horses, like Celine Dion's heart, will go on and on. He persisted, and he refused to learn from the mistakes of the First World War, mistakes that he had made. The reality is that Haig, in addition to being the general who ultimately won the war on the Western Front, was very much a technophile. He embraced the tank, aerial reconnaissance, and the light machine gun. And he was a keen exponent of the potentially war-winning use of poison gas. Some historians have suggested that he may have almost been too keen on technological innovation. Haig won the war. So it wasn't the influx of fresh American troops against a weakened, weary German army, or the exhaustion caused by fighting for 4 years in this terrible, inhuman condition that was the Western Front. It wasn't that Germany was collapsing politically, socially, or economically. No, it was all Douglas Haig, was it? I don't think so. Haig was very much a technophile. Really, because I've read differently. I've read that he had to be pushed into using tanks and aerial reconnaissance and stuff like that. Though I will admit, both arguments have been used by historians. It's a matter of some debate. But that doesn't negate the fact that 10 years later he was still championing the horse in warfare when cavalry had proven ineffective against modern technology. And as the Times is showing, he's thinking that the tank and the aeroplane and the motor car, that they will somehow go away, that they won't be useful in future wars. Well, I don't see modern wars using horses. I see them using tanks and aeroplanes and even more deadly mechanical instruments of death, such as drone strikes. As for the poisoned gas thing, are you saying his championing of poisoned gas, which turned their insides, turned them inside out, was a good thing. Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. This video is bad history, and should not be relied upon, even at the most fundamental level, as any sort of reasoned, empirical evidence as to the abilities of one of Britain's greatest generals. I am not the only one who has used this argument. It has been used by better and more experienced historians than me. It's been used by other people. As for evidence, it's not evidence. It's an interpretation, it's an opinion, it's analysis of a source. It's not meant to be taken as historical evidence. The historical evidence is the source. The video is the interpretation of that source. It is my argument suggesting that Haig didn't get why his tactics failed. And for that reason, he was a fool. This is a bite-sized edutainment video expressing an opinion on a historical source. It's arguing a point, which is precisely what history is. And just because you don't agree with my opinion, just because you don't agree with my argument, that doesn't make me wrong. It doesn't make my argument any less valid. As for the suggestion that Haig was one of Britain's greatest generals, this is from a military historian called B.H. Liddell-Hart, who was on the Western Front. He, Haig, was a man of supreme egoism and utter lack of scruple, who, to his overweening ambition, sacrificed hundreds of thousands of men, a man who betrayed even his most devoted assistants, as well as the government under which he served, a man who gained his ends by trickery of a kind that was not merely immoral, but criminal. This is from Paul Fussell. In a situation demanding the military equivalent of wit and invention, Haig had none. Another military historian, John Keegan. On the Somme, Haig had sent the flower of British youth to death or mutilation. At Passchendaele, he had tipped the survivors into a slough of despond. And finally, this is what David Lloyd George had to say about Haig in his memoirs. When I ventured to express it to Generals Joffre and Haig, my doubts as to whether cavalry could ever operate successfully on a front bristling for miles behind the enemy line with barbed wire and machine guns. Both generals fell ecstatically on me, and Joffre, in particular, explained that he expected the French cavalry to ride through the broken German lines on his front the following morning. Apologies for the bad Welsh accent. But, even Lloyd George was saying Haig didn't understand. Lloyd George is saying to him, look, you're sending horses against barbed wire and machine guns. Is this going to do any good? No, I don't think it is. And there's Haig and this other guy, Joffre, laughing at him. One of the smartest men in British politics. One of the smartest men there has ever been in British politics. And Haig's just saying, No, you're wrong. He was told, this isn't going to work. Lloyd George said to him, this isn't going to work. Haig laughed at him. It didn't work. And 10 years later, he's saying, oh, yeah, horses, we'll still be able to use horses. He still didn't understand why it didn't work. When Lloyd George had told him that it didn't work, when the Western Front, the events on the Western Front proved cavalry warfare didn't work. And 10 years later, he still didn't get it. That makes him one of the biggest fucking morons to ever command a British army, in my opinion. History is not one-sided. History is complicated and sources can be interpreted in multiple ways. History is an argument, and just because you don't agree with one argument or interpretation doesn't make it invalid and doesn't make it wrong. Just because you don't agree with an argument doesn't make it ahistorical or bad history.